You've been asking God for breakthrough, but you've been holding on to comfort like it's your lifeline. You've been praying for elevation, for open doors, for new levels, but here's what no one tells you: God will often disturb what's familiar to deliver what's greater. And if you're feeling uncomfortable right now, if things around you feel unstable, uncertain, unrecognizable, don't panic. That's not punishment, that's positioning. That's God pulling you out of what's been safe to push you into what's supernatural, because comfort zones are great for maintenance, but they're terrible for miracles. And if God left you in comfort, you'd never step into calling. See, we think growth feels like glory, but sometimes growth feels like grief. Grieving what was, grieving what's no longer working, grieving the old rhythm, the old relationships, the old routine. But God didn't call you to comfortable, He called you to conquer. And what if the very thing you're fighting to stay in is the thing God is fighting to bring you out of? What if that relationship, that job, that mindset, what if it's too small for where God's trying to take you? You've been shrinking your faith to fit your situation. When God is trying to stretch your situation to match your faith, you say, God, why does this hurt? And He says, because I'm stretching you. You say, God, why is everything changing? And He says, because I'm growing you. You say, God, I don't recognize where I am. And He says, that's because I'm bringing you somewhere you've never been. God will bless you beyond what you've built, but He has to break you out of what you've settled for. Sometimes He'll shut doors you were leaning on. He'll move people you depended on. He'll let the boat rock until you step out and walk on the water. And you're thinking, God, I didn't ask for this storm. But maybe the storm isn't meant to sink you. Maybe it's meant to send you. Because you prayed for purpose. You asked God to use you. You cried out for more, but you can't get more while clinging to mediocre. You can't receive the new while refusing to release the old. So here's the truth: God is breaking you out. Out of comfort, out of fear, out of small thinking, out of safe places, not because He's cruel, but because He's committed to your calling. You weren't created just to survive. You were created to step out, stand firm, and shake the ground with your faith. So yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it's uncertain. Yes, it's unfamiliar. But it's also necessary, because God is not just trying to change your situation. He's trying to change you. He's upgrading your faith, expanding your vision, breaking limits off your mind, rewriting the rules you lived by, destroying every ceiling you put over yourself. And when the process is painful, remember, your current discomfort is a clue. It's not the end, it's the entry point. You are not stuck. You are being sent. Don't settle. Don't retreat. Don't go back to what feels safe. Go forward into what God is calling you to, because He is breaking you out. To bless you beyond, God will disrupt your comfort to develop your calling. Sometimes we think that when life gets hard or things feel unstable, it must mean we did something wrong or that God has left us. But in reality, that disruption may be the very evidence that God is near and active in your life. Disruption is a tool in God's hand. He uses it not to destroy, but to develop. He uses it to shake you loose from everything that is keeping you small. He uses it to pull you out of patterns that are limiting you, habits that are draining you, environments that are no longer serving your assignment. Comfort feels good, but it can become a trap. Comfort convinces you to settle. It tells you that this is enough, that you're doing okay, that growth isn't worth the effort. But God loves you too much to let you stay in what's just okay. He didn't call you to live a life that's just safe. He called you to step into significance, and to do that, He will disrupt the comfort you've been clinging to. When you pray for God to use you, don't be surprised when He starts rearranging your life. Don't be surprised when He shakes things up, when doors you depended on start closing, when the relationships you thought would always be there start fading. That's not a sign that things are going wrong. It's a sign that God is shifting things. When God begins to prepare you for your next level, He often starts by confronting everything in you that is resisting the change. He'll challenge your routine, your schedule, your preferences. He'll bring you into places where your usual strengths don't work, just to show you that His power is made perfect in your weakness. God doesn't want you relying on your comfort zone. He wants you relying on Him. So when your comfort is disrupted, it's because your calling is being activated. God knows what you're capable of. He knows what He placed inside you, but He also knows that you'll never discover it while staying stuck in safety. Some of the greatest moves of God start with the greatest discomfort. Think about the times in your life when you really grew, when you really shifted, when something deep inside you changed. Was it in the middle of ease? Or was it in the moments when you didn't know what was coming next, when you felt stretched, pressed, and uncertain? That's the breaking place, but it's also the birthing place. God will break routines to birth revelation. He'll strip away what's familiar so you can finally see what's possible. Sometimes He'll even let you lose what you thought you couldn't live without, just to prove that He is all you need. And in that place of disruption, if you lean into the discomfort rather than run from it, you'll find direction you never knew you needed. You'll uncover strength you didn't know you had. You'll begin to hear God more clearly because the noise of comfort has been silenced. Comfort makes you passive. It convinces you to wait, to wish, to hope without moving. But calling requires pursuit. It requires faith. It requires you to step even when you don't see, to obey even when it hurts, to believe even when there's no evidence. That's why God disrupts your comfort, because He knows you won't chase your calling while you're still clinging to control. He'll put you in places where your plan doesn't work, so you'll finally trust His. He'll remove the crutches you've leaned on, so you'll learn to walk by faith and not by sight. Disruption is development. Every time something in your life falls apart, it might be God pulling down what was built on fear, so He can rebuild it with faith. Every time the door slams in your face, it might be because He's getting ready to open something so much bigger, but He had to get your attention first. And sometimes the only way He can get your attention is to make you uncomfortable enough to move. People may look at your situation and say you're being punished, that you're losing. But what they don't see is that God is pruning you, stretching you, preparing you for something greater. They don't see the foundation He's laying under the surface. They don't know the prayers you've been praying behind closed doors. They don't hear the cries you've whispered in the night, asking God for more, for purpose, for breakthrough. And God heard you. But instead of sending you a shortcut, He sent you a shaking. He shook your expectations, your plans, your comfort zone. Not because He didn't care, but because He cared too much to leave you where you were. You were made for more. You were made to stand out, to step out, to break cycles, to carry influence. But to walk in that, you have to be willing to let go of where you've been. So when your life gets disrupted, don't just ask God to fix it. Ask Him what He's developing. Ask Him what He's revealing. Ask Him what He's preparing you for. Because the disruption isn't random, it's intentional, it's targeted, it's strategic. God is not breaking you down to hurt you. He's breaking you out to bless you. He's breaking you out of every mindset, every pattern, every fear, every limitation that's been holding you back. He's breaking you out of comparison. He's breaking you out of excuses. He's breaking you out of small thinking. He's breaking you out of comfort because He's calling you into greatness. Discomfort is not punishment, it's preparation for purpose. Most people see discomfort as a sign to stop, as a warning that something is wrong, as evidence that God has turned His face away. But what if that discomfort isn't meant to drive you away from God, but to draw you deeper into His process? What if the pain you're feeling right now is not the evidence of failure, but the early signs of transformation? Because before God ever promotes you, He prepares you, and preparation never feels like applause. It feels like pressure, it feels like stretching, it feels like silence, it feels like surrender. When God gets ready to use someone, He doesn't send comfort. He sends the kind of resistance that reveals what's real and what's not, what's built on faith and what's built on feelings, what's rooted in truth and what's just surface-level convenience. He will expose the parts of you that can't handle the next level, not to shame you, but to shape you. Discomfort is not something to avoid, it's something to discern, because hidden inside your discomfort is the training ground for your next level. Hidden inside your frustration is the seed of your future assignment. God is not trying to embarrass you, He's trying to equip you. But equipping doesn't happen in comfort zones. It happens when you're tested. When you're tired, when you're tempted to quit. That's when He's forging endurance in you. That's when He's building resilience. That's when He's showing you how to stand even when it hurts, how to trust even when it's confusing, how to move forward even when it's unclear. He's not just trying to bless your circumstances, He's trying to build your character, because your calling is too valuable to rest on a shaky foundation. So God will use discomfort to expose the cracks. He'll use pressure to surface the places where you're still relying on yourself, still believing the lies, still bound by what people think. He'll strip away every false identity so that what's left is the real you, the one He created, the one He called, the one He's preparing to release. You might be in a season where everything feels unfamiliar. You don't feel in control, you don't feel capable, you feel like you're in over your head, and maybe you are. But that's where faith grows best, in the deep end, in the stretch, in the space between what I know and what God said. Discomfort is the birthplace of dependence. When you don't have the answers, you lean into the one who does. When you don't have the strength, you find yourself relying on the source. And in those moments, God does His greatest work. Not when you're comfortable, but when you're crying out. Not when you've got it all together, but when you're completely undone. He doesn't need your perfection, He wants your permission. And sometimes the only way you give Him full permission is when your own plans fall apart. So if you feel like you're being stretched right now, it's not because you're weak. It's because you're being strengthened. Look at every person God used in Scripture, and you'll see the same pattern. Discomfort always came before destiny. Joseph was thrown in a pit before he reached the palace. David was running from Saul before he ever sat on the throne. Moses had to leave the comfort of Pharaoh's house and wander in the wilderness before he could deliver anyone. Even Jesus had to endure the garden before He could step into glory. If you're feeling pressed, if you're feeling uncomfortable, if you're feeling broken, you're in good company, because God uses broken vessels to carry His greatest power. He uses discomfort to train you for responsibility. He uses it to show you that your strength doesn't come from comfort, it comes from calling. And sometimes the pain you're trying to pray away is the very pressure that's pushing you into purpose. We live in a world that tells us to avoid discomfort at all costs. Numb the pain, escape the tension. Find the shortcut, but God doesn't work like that. He doesn't rush the process because He knows that rushed development leads to shallow roots. He wants you grounded, not just gifted, anchored, not just anointed. So He takes His time. He leads you into wilderness seasons where you learn how to trust His voice. He puts you in dry places so you learn how to draw from His word. He allows the delays so that what He builds in you lasts longer than what's built around you. You might be waiting, but you're not wasting. You're being prepared. And that preparation doesn't look like stages and spotlights. It looks like sweat and sacrifice, patience and persistence. Faith in the unseen and obedience in the unknown. Discomfort has a way of waking us up. It reminds us that we were never made to stay stuck in what's easy. It reminds us that growth doesn't come from staying in the same place. It reminds us that calling comes with a cost. You may be tempted to retreat. You may want to go back to what was predictable, to what you could control. But God didn't call you to convenience, He called you to courage. And courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward in faith even when you feel afraid. It's trusting that if God led you into it, He'll lead you through it. It's believing that He knows exactly what He's doing, even when you don't understand. He is the author of your process. He is the builder of your life. And sometimes His construction starts with demolition. Sometimes He tears down what was comfortable so He can raise up what's unshakable. Sometimes He removes what made you feel secure so you can find security in Him alone. What you're walking through is not random. It's not meaningless. It's not wasted. Every uncomfortable situation is preparing you for something. Every delay is developing something in you. Every challenge is sharpening you. Every test is refining you. And every stretch is shaping you for the size of the calling you've been asking for. You can't carry a big calling with a weak character. You can't walk in influence if you're still ruled by insecurity. You can't step into authority if you're still bound by approval. So God allows the discomfort, not to discourage you, but to deliver you from everything that could sabotage your future. He's preparing you for weight. He's preparing you for impact. He's preparing you for the promise you prayed for, because He's a good father, and good fathers don't prepare their children for comfort. They prepare them for calling. You can't step into greater while clinging to familiar. There is a tension that happens when God begins calling you into something new, something greater, something beyond what you've experienced. It's not always a matter of willingness, it's often a matter of release. Because stepping into something new means loosening your grip on what has been, and that's not easy. The familiar becomes comfortable, and the comfortable becomes safe. It's predictable. It makes sense. Even if it's broken, at least you understand it. Even if it's limiting, at least you've learned how to live with it. But when God calls you to greater, He doesn't give you the whole picture. He gives you a word, a nudge, a prompting, and then He waits to see if you'll trust Him enough to let go of what you've been holding. You can't carry both comfort and calling. One will require you to release the other. Greater doesn't come packaged in convenience. It comes wrapped in faith. There are moments when God will stir your heart, and you'll start to feel the weight of something more. You won't even be able to explain it. Everything in your life may still look the same on the outside, but something inside you will feel unsettled. That's the Holy Spirit disrupting your comfort. That's the still small voice saying, "This is not all there is." That's the divine reminder that you were made for more. And when that restlessness comes, it's not something to ignore or silence. It's something to pay attention to, because God speaks in that tension. He shows you that the familiar, as safe as it may seem, has become a ceiling, and greater can't flow where old systems, old cycles, and old thinking still rule. So He starts to stir you. He starts to shake things. He starts to remove certain people, close certain doors, and make you uncomfortable in places that used to bring peace. Not because He's angry, but because He's aligning you with purpose. When you hold on to what's familiar, you're putting your trust in what you can control. But faith is not about control. It's about surrender. It's about saying, "God, even though I don't know what's next, I know you're in it." Familiarity can trick you into thinking you're growing simply because you're busy, but movement isn't always progress. You can walk in circles for years and never move forward, and many people stay stuck not because they lack talent or opportunity, but because they're unwilling to leave what feels safe. They'd rather stay in a place that's slowly draining them than step into a place that requires dependence. But every time you say no to greater, you're saying yes to stagnation. Every time you resist the stretching, you're resisting the blessing. Every time you cling to what was, you're closing your hands to what could be. God is not limited by your past, but you can be if you refuse to release it. There are doors that will only open when you're willing to walk away from what's behind you. God told Abraham to leave his father's house and go to a land He would show him. But He didn't show him first. He said go before He said there. And that's how faith works. It moves before it sees. It obeys before it understands. You won't get a map for greater. You'll get a moment. A whisper, a burden, a confirmation in your spirit, and then you'll have a decision to make. Will you stay where it's familiar, or will you step into what's promised? Will you keep rehearsing the same excuses, or will you finally risk believing that God's plan is bigger than your fear? You can't walk in new doors with old keys. You can't live a new life with old patterns. You can't receive a fresh word with a stale mindset. God is trying to do something new, but He won't force it. He'll invite you. He'll stir you, but you have to respond. Sometimes what's familiar is not just a place. It's a pattern, a mindset, a belief system, a way of thinking that has kept you small. And God will confront those patterns not to condemn you, but to free you. He'll put His finger on areas you've ignored. He'll expose the lies you've lived with. He'll challenge the agreements you've made with fear, insecurity, and limitation. because those things can't go with you into greater. They won't survive in the new season. The version of you that fits in the familiar can't function in your future. So don't be surprised if God starts calling you to let go of more than just external things. Sometimes it's the internal stuff, the attitude, the pride, the unforgiveness, the doubt. He's clearing the clutter so he can pour out clarity. He's removing the weight so you can run lighter. He's stripping off what's shallow so he can reveal what's solid. You may not feel ready. That's okay. God doesn't call the ready. He calls the willing. He qualifies the surrendered. He promotes the obedient. Greater doesn't require perfection, it requires positioning. It's not about what you have in your hand. It's about what you're willing to release. Are you willing to walk away from the crowd? Are you willing to look foolish in the eyes of others? Are you willing to move without all the answers? Because that's the doorway into greater. That's the path into purpose. That's the invitation God keeps extending, not just to do more, but to become more, to grow, to trust, to step even when you don't see the full staircase. And every step of faith you take is a declaration that you believe God's promise is better than your past. You can't step into greater while clinging to familiar, because God's plans require fresh perspective. They require renewed minds and transformed hearts. They require the humility to admit you don't know everything and the courage to believe God does. Greater is not just about impact, it's about intimacy. It's about knowing God in deeper ways, and sometimes that deeper knowing only comes when you walk through seasons where He is all you have. Letting go of the familiar is never easy, but it is always necessary. Because greater is not waiting in your comfort zone, it's waiting in your obedience. It's waiting on the other side of your yes. It's waiting in the tension between where you've been and where God is calling you to go. And if you'll trust Him, if you'll release the familiar, you'll find that what He has ahead of you is greater than anything you're leaving behind.